Forget what the exhibition shooters and Wild West shows taught you. Real frontier gunfights weren't won with fancy spins, theatrical draws, or rapid-fire hammer fanning. They were brutal, close-range exchanges where the man who kept his weapon under control lived to see another sunrise. Today, we're counting down 15 gun-handling tricks that looked impressive in saloons and dime novels, but got men killed on dusty streets and lonely trails across the American West. These weren't just bad habits, they were fatal mistakes disguised as showmanship, turning skilled shooters into cautionary tales. Number 15, the Revolver Twirl, the showman's suicide picture. A cowboy spinning his Colt Peacemaker around his trigger finger, the polished steel catching lamplight as it rotates through the air in a perfect circle. It looked magnificent in Wild West shows and medicine shows touring eastern cities in the 1880s and 1890s. Exhibition shooters like Buffalo Bill Cody's performers made fortunes demonstrating these flashy maneuvers. But on the real frontier, this trick was a death sentence. The revolver twirl required removing your finger from the trigger guard entirely, spinning the weapon around the trigger itself, and catching it again in firing position. During those 2 or 3 seconds of rotation, a gunfighter was completely defenseless. His weapon was in motion, impossible to aim or fire, while his opponent could draw and shoot without interference. The physics made it even more dangerous. A Colt single-action army weighed nearly 2.5 pounds loaded. Spinning that weight around a single finger demanded perfect balance and timing. A slippery palm from sweat, a slightly off-center spin, or a moment's miscalculation sent the revolver flying across the room or clattering to the floor. Dozens of newspaper accounts from Dodge City, Tombstone, and other frontier towns describe would-be gunfighters dropping their weapons mid-twirl during confrontations. The psychological effect was devastating. An opponent watching someone fumble their gun mid-spin knew they were facing an amateur more concerned with style than survival. Several documented cases from the 1870s describe fatal shootings where the victim's revolver was found several feet away, having been dropped during an attempted spin. The trick that was supposed to intimidate instead announced incompetence. Number 14, fanning the hammer, speed without accuracy. Imagine holding your revolver in one hand while using your other palm to rapidly slap the hammer back and forth, firing all 6 shots in under 3 seconds. Fanning the hammer became legendary through dime novels and later through Hollywood westerns. Writers described gunfighters emptying their cylinders in the blink of an eye, overwhelming opponents with sheer firepower. The technique involved holding the trigger down continuously while using your offhand to repeatedly strike the hammer, forcing it back and releasing it to fire. In theory, this created rapid fire that rivaled later automatic weapons. In practice, it created noise, smoke, and a lot of missed shots. Professional shooters in the late 1800s tested fanning extensively and reached the same conclusion every time. Accuracy was virtually impossible. The violent slapping motion jerked the barrel in unpredictable directions with every hammer strike. Even at close range, hitting a man-sized target required luck more than skill. Famous shootist and peace officer Wyatt Earp was quoted in 1896, explicitly warning against fanning, calling it a fool's technique that wasted ammunition and announced your position. Real gunfights on the frontier rarely involved more than 2 or 3 shots total. Men who fanned their hammers burned through their ammunition in seconds, then stood empty-handed while their opponent took careful aim. The muzzle flash and smoke from 6 rapid shots also blinded the shooter temporarily, leaving them vulnerable immediately after. County records from Arizona and Kansas territories document multiple cases where men died with empty revolvers in their hands, having fanned all 6 shots without hitting anyone. Their opponents then killed them while they fumbled to reload. Number 13, hip shooting, the gambler's gamble. Of all the practical ways to get yourself killed in the Old West, firing from the hip might have been the most seductive. Unlike revolver twirls or hammer fanning, hip shooting actually worked at extremely close range, making it seem viable. Gamblers and saloon fighters favored the technique because it was faster than raising a revolver to eye level. The shooter drew and fired in one smooth motion, pulling the trigger as soon as the barrel cleared leather. At distances of 5 feet or less, inside cramped saloons or during surprise encounters in alleyways, hip shooting could be devastatingly effective. But step back 10 yards and it became wildly unreliable. The human eye cannot accurately judge angles and elevations without aligning the barrel with the target visually. Hip shooters relied entirely on muscle memory and instinct. This worked for men who practiced obsessively, shooting thousands of rounds at close-range targets. For everyone else, it was a gamble with their lives. Bill Hickok could reportedly hip shoot with uncanny accuracy, but contemporary accounts describe him practicing daily, firing hundreds of rounds to maintain that skill. Most cowboys, settlers, and even lawmen couldn't afford that much ammunition or practice time. When hip shooting failed, it failed catastrophically. The shooter had already committed to the draw and fired, revealing their position and intent. If that first shot missed, their opponent now had time to aim properly. Dozens of documented gunfights from the 1870s and 1880s describe men dying with smoking revolvers in their hands, having fired first from the hip and missed. Their opponents took an extra second to aim and didn't miss. The technique required natural talent that few possessed, making it deadly for anyone who overestimated their abilities. Number 12. The border shift, the trick that backfired. What do you get when a shooter tries to switch his revolver from one hand to the other mid-draw? In the movies, you get a spectacular display of ambidextrous skill. On the real frontier, you got a fumbled weapon and a bullet in the chest. The border shift, sometimes called the road agent spin, was an advanced technique that supposedly allowed a gunfighter to confuse opponents about which hand held the weapon. The shooter would draw with his strong hand, then toss the revolver in a spinning arc to his weak hand during the draw motion. This theoretically allowed for unexpected shooting angles and confused adversaries who had focused on the wrong hand. In reality, it added unnecessary complexity to a life or death situation that demanded simplicity above all else. The technique originated in the 1860s among professional gamblers who wanted impressive flourishes for their axe. Some exhibition shooters in Wild West shows performed border shifts successfully, but always with unloaded weapons or blanks. With a loaded 4-pound revolver flying through the air between your hands, countless things could go wrong. A sweaty palm, a slightly off-center throw, or a moment's distraction turned the border shift into a disaster. The revolver could slip from your grasp entirely, land pointing the wrong direction, or discharge accidentally during the transfer. Several documented cases from Texas and Arizona describe men shooting themselves during attempted border shifts, the revolver firing as it changed hands. Others simply dropped their weapons mid-transfer, standing defenseless as their opponents fired. The border shift embodied everything wrong with flashy gun handling. It prioritized showmanship over effectiveness and introduced multiple failure points into a process that needed to be absolutely reliable. Number 11. The Crossdraw. While mounted, cavalry's fatal mistake. Picture yourself sitting on a horse, your revolver holstered on your left hip, with the grip facing forward for a crossdraw. When trouble appears, you reach across your body to draw, while maintaining control of your mount with your other hand. It sounds practical for mounted riders, and cavalry manuals from the 1860s actually taught variations of this technique. But in real combat situations, the crossdraw while mounted combined every disadvantage of both mounted shooting and crossdraw mechanics into one deadly package. The motion required crossing your gun hand across your body's center line, creating a long, slow arc before the barrel could point at a target. While seated on a moving horse, this arc became even more exaggerated and unpredictable. The horse's movement made the draw inconsistent every single time. A walking horse created one motion pattern, a trotting horse another, and a galloping horse made accurate drawing nearly impossible. Add in the horse's natural reactions to gunfire, unexpected movements, and the rider's need to maintain control, and the crossdraw became a recipe for disaster. Historical accounts from cavalry actions during the Indian Wars describe troopers struggling to draw their revolvers while their horses panicked at the first shots. Many dropped their weapons entirely, or found themselves pointing in the wrong direction when the barrel finally cleared the holster. Professional cavalrymen learned to either dismount before engaging or carry their revolvers already drawn. The crossdraw, while mounted, looked practical in theory, but failed under the chaos of real combat. Men who relied on it often died with their revolvers still half drawn, tangled in their own reins and equipment. Number 10. Walking while drawing. The moving target problem. Imagine facing down an opponent in a dusty street, and instead of standing still to draw, you start walking toward them while reaching for your revolver. Hollywood westerns made this look intimidating and professional, The hero striding forward confidently while drawing suggested absolute mastery and fearlessness. In the real Old West, it suggested you were about to die. Walking while drawing combined two separate actions that each required total focus and perfect execution. Drawing demanded precise muscle memory, a smooth motion from holster to firing position without snagging or fumbling. Walking demanded balance, coordination, and awareness of terrain. Doing both simultaneously degraded the quality of each action. The human body cannot maintain the same level of fine motor control while in motion that it achieves while stationary. The walking motion created constant small variations in hand position, grip angle, and draw speed. On uneven frontier streets filled with ruts, horse droppings, and debris, a misplaced step could throw off the entire draw. Men stumbled, shifted weight unexpectedly, or adjusted their balance mid-draw, resulting in jerky, inconsistent weapon presentation. Even worse, walking while drawing extended the time before you could fire. A stationary shooter could draw and shoot in under 2 seconds. A walking shooter needed 3 or 4 seconds to complete the same action while maintaining forward motion. That extra second or two gave a stationary opponent plenty of time to draw, aim, and fire. Multiple historical accounts describe fatal shootings, where witnesses noted the deceased had been walking toward their killer while drawing. The technique looked confident but was tactically suicidal against anyone who stood still and focused entirely on a fast, accurate draw. Number 9. The sideways hold, Hollywood's deadly invention. Long before modern action movies made sideways gun holding infamous, some frontier shooters experimented with tilting their revolvers during gunfights. The technique supposedly improved point shooting by aligning the barrel with the natural angle of the arm and wrist. Instead of holding the revolver vertical with the barrel pointing straight up when raised, the shooter canted the weapon 30 to 45 degrees to the side. This unorthodox grip appeared occasionally in the 1880s among gamblers and saloon fighters who spent more time indoors than on horseback. The theory claimed that a tilted revolver reduced wrist strain and allowed for faster follow-up shots. The reality was quite different and often fatal. Tilting the revolver sideways fundamentally changed how bullets impacted targets. Revolvers of the frontier era fired relatively large, slow-moving bullets that relied on straight trajectory and significant mass for stopping power. A .45 Colt cartridge traveled at roughly 700 feet per second, far slower than modern ammunition. When fired from a canted barrel, these heavy bullets followed altered flight paths, curving slightly due to the weapon's rotation. At distances beyond 10 feet, this curve became significant enough to cause misses. Even more problematic, the tilted grip made it nearly impossible to use the revolver's iron sights. Front and rear sights were designed for vertical alignment, cant the weapon sideways, and those sights became useless reference points. Shooters had to rely entirely on instinct and point shooting, which worked only at very close range. Several newspaper accounts from frontier towns describe gunfights where men fired multiple shots with tilted revolvers, missing every shot before being killed by opponents using conventional grips and actually aiming their weapons. Number 8. The cavalry draw at full gallop. The balance breaker. Picture a cavalry trooper at full gallop, trying to draw his revolver from a belt holster while his horse thunders across rough terrain at 20 miles per hour. Military manuals acknowledge this scenario and recommended against it, but in the chaos of frontier combat, troopers often had no choice. The cavalry draw at full gallop represented one of the most difficult and dangerous weapon handling situations on the American frontier. At a full gallop, a horse's motion becomes violent and unpredictable. All 4 hooves leave the ground simultaneously during each stride, creating a moment of weightlessness followed by jarring impact. The rider bounces in the saddle, rises and falls with each stride, and constantly shifts weight to maintain balance. Attempting a smooth, controlled draw under these conditions was nearly impossible. The trooper needed one hand on the reins to maintain control and direction. The other hand had to reach down, locate the holster despite violent motion, grip the revolver correctly, and draw without the barrel catching on equipment or the saddle. The Army conducted tests in the 1870s that showed accuracy dropped to less than 5% for cavalry troopers firing at full gallop. Even hitting a target was unlikely. Actually aiming for a specific point was impossible. Worse, the violent motion often caused troopers to drop their revolvers entirely during the draw. A sweaty hand combined with bouncing motion frequently resulted in weapons slipping from grips and falling to the ground. Multiple cavalry reports from Indian Wars engagements mention troopers losing their revolvers during charges. The cavalry draw at full gallop looked dramatic and aggressive, but achieved little beyond wasting ammunition and sometimes disarming the shooter entirely. Number 7. Rapid fire, double action. Without aiming, the spray and pray. Imagine holding a double-action revolver like a Colt Lightning or Smith & Wesson in the 1880s, pulling the trigger repeatedly as fast as possible without bothering to aim. Double-action revolvers offered a revolutionary capability for their era. Unlike single-action revolvers that required manually cocking the hammer between shots, double-action designs allowed continuous firing simply by pulling the trigger repeatedly. Each trigger pull both cocked and released the hammer. This enabled rapid fire that seemed incredibly advantageous. Shooters could empty a cylinder in seconds, overwhelming opponents with volume of fire, but that advantage disappeared entirely without accurate shot placement. The double-action trigger pull required significantly more force than single-action shooting. A Colt Peacemaker needed roughly 4 pounds of pressure on the trigger when cocked. A Colt Lightning required 12 to 14 pounds of pressure for each double-action pull. That heavy pull jerked the barrel with every shot, making accurate fire nearly impossible during rapid shooting. Professional exhibition shooters demonstrated double-action accuracy, but only by pulling the trigger slowly and carefully, defeating the entire purpose of rapid fire capability. In real gunfights, men who pulled the trigger as fast as possible created impressive noise and smoke, but rarely hit anything. The heavy trigger pull yanked the barrel up and to the side with each shot, sending bullets wild. Multiple documented cases from the 1880s describe gunfights where shooters emptied entire cylinders of double-action revolvers without scoring a single hit. Their opponents, using careful single-action fire, then killed them while they reloaded. The spray and pray approach wasted ammunition, revealed your position, and demonstrated poor training to anyone watching. Real professionals knew that accurate fire mattered far more than rapid fire. Number 6. The Mexican standoff stance. The posture of death movies made the Mexican standoff famous. Two opponents facing each other at close range, both with weapons drawn and pointed directly at each other, neither willing to fire first. In Hollywood, these tense moments lasted minutes, with dramatic dialogue and careful negotiation. On the real frontier, Mexican standoff situations ended in seconds, and the men who survived weren't those who maintained the dramatic pose. The fundamental problem with the standoff stance was simple. If both shooters already had weapons drawn and aimed, the first to fire won. Hesitation was suicide, yet the standoff scenario implied both parties waiting for the other to make a move. This created a tactical stalemate that favored whoever broke it first. Men who stood frozen in Mexican standoff positions, revolver raised and aimed, often died because they were too busy posturing to shoot. The raised extended arm position was also physically exhausting. A 2.5-pound revolver held at arm's length causes muscle fatigue within seconds. The arm begins to shake, aim wavers, and reaction time slows. Experienced gunfighters knew better than to maintain extended aim positions during confrontations. They kept their weapons ready but not fully extended, conserving energy and maintaining flexibility. Multiple historical accounts describe fatal shootings, where witnesses reported both men stood pointing weapons at each other before one finally fired. The hesitation that made the moment dramatic also made it deadly. The Mexican standoff stance represented poor tactical thinking disguised as dramatic confrontation. Men who understood real gunfighting ended conflicts quickly and decisively rather than standing in theatrical poses that benefited no one except those watching. Number 5. Showboating after the shot. The premature celebration. Picture a shooter firing his revolver at an opponent, watching the man stumble backward, then immediately lowering his weapon or turning away in premature victory. This fatal mistake killed numerous men across the American frontier who confused theatrical combat with real survival situations. Movies and dime novels portrayed gunfights ending with a single shot. The hero fired, the villain fell, and the conflict concluded immediately. Real frontier gunfights were far messier and more uncertain. Men hit with handgun rounds frequently remained conscious and dangerous for seconds or even minutes. A .45 Colt round delivered significant energy but didn't instantly incapacitate unless it struck vital organs or the central nervous system. Many shootings required multiple hits before the target stopped fighting. Shooters who lowered their weapons after one shot often discovered their opponent was still very much alive and now incredibly motivated to return fire. Multiple documented cases describe men shooting opponents, assuming victory, then being killed by return fire from the wounded adversary they'd dismissed. The showboating mentality came from entertainment culture that portrayed gunfights as single-shot duels. In reality, professional fighters kept shooting until the threat was completely neutralized. Wyatt Earp's documented advice emphasized firing until your opponent was on the ground and motionless. Men who stopped shooting to admire their work or celebrate prematurely often paid for that mistake with their lives. The frontier rewarded vigilance and thoroughness, not theatrical flourishes. Even wounded men could pull triggers, and premature celebration gave them opportunity to do exactly that. Professional gunfighters treated every opponent as dangerous until proven otherwise through complete incapacitation. Number 4. The border roll reload. Flashover function. What do you get when you combine a necessary action, like reloading, with unnecessary flourishes? The border roll reload answered that question by getting men killed across Texas and Arizona territories in the 1870s and 80s. Traditional reloading of a single-action revolver was methodical and time-consuming. The shooter opened the loading gate, rotated the cylinder, used the ejector rod to push out spent cartridges one at a time, then loaded fresh rounds individually before closing the gate and returning to action. The entire process took 30 to 45 seconds for someone proficient. Some shooters developed the border roll technique to supposedly speed this process. They would flip the revolver upside down, open the loading gate, and shake the weapon while rotating the cylinder, allowing spent cartridges to fall free under gravity rather than using the ejector rod. This looked impressive and seemed faster, but created numerous problems. First, spent cartridges didn't always fall free cleanly. Fouling from black powder frequently caused cases to stick, requiring the ejector rod anyway. Shaking the revolver violently while holding it upside down also risked dropping the entire weapon if your grip wasn't perfect. Most critically, the border roll reload required taking your eyes off potential threats to watch the cylinder and ensure cartridges were actually ejecting. During actual combat situations, taking your attention off your surroundings for 30 seconds could be fatal. Multiple accounts describe men being shot while performing elaborate reloads that left them defenseless and distracted. Professional fighters learn to reload efficiently but methodically, keeping their awareness on threats rather than showing off manual dexterity. The border roll reload prioritized style over survival, exactly the wrong priority when your life depended on getting your weapon functional again as quickly as possible. Number 3. One-handed cocking. The grip that killed. Imagine trying to cock your single-action revolver using only your shooting hand, without using your offhand to pull back the hammer. This technique involved hooking the hammer spur on your belt, holster, or saddle horn, then pushing the revolver forward to cock it against the fixed object. Alternatively, some shooters learned to hook the hammer spur with their thumb while simultaneously rolling their palm and fingers to provide the necessary leverage. Both methods appeared in shooting exhibitions and were occasionally described in period accounts of gunfights. The appeal was maintaining a ready firing grip while preparing the next shot, and supposedly enabling faster shooting than using both hands. The reality was far different and often fatal. One-handed cocking required perfect technique and ideal conditions. Any slip, any miscalculation, and the hammer either didn't cock fully or the weapon discharged prematurely. Partially cocked hammers could fall under their own weight or from slight jarring, causing unexpected discharge. Shooters focusing on the complex one-handed cocking motion took their attention away from their target and their situation. In the heat of combat, with adrenaline surging and hands potentially shaking, the fine motor control required for one-handed cocking became nearly impossible. Multiple documented cases describe accidental discharges during attempted one-handed cocking, with shooters injuring themselves or completely missing their targets due to poorly controlled shots. Even worse, the technique often resulted in weapons that appeared cocked but weren't fully engaged, meaning they wouldn't fire when the trigger was pulled. Men died because they pointed guns that they believed were ready but hadn't actually cocked properly. Professional shooters unanimously recommended using both hands for all revolver manipulation, prioritizing reliability over speed. Number 2. The reverse cavalry spin. the disarming disaster. Long before the border shift tried to switch hands, there was an even more dangerous cavalry technique that got men killed from the Mexican-American War through the Indian Wars of the 1870s. The reverse cavalry spin was a close combat technique supposedly designed for mounted troopers fighting at extremely close quarters. When an enemy closed within arm's reach, the trooper would grip his revolver by the barrel instead of the grip, using the weapon as a club. After striking the enemy, he would release the barrel, allow the revolver to rotate in midair, then catch it by the grip ready to fire. This technique allegedly allowed seamless transition between clubbing and shooting. In reality, it almost never worked, and frequently resulted in disarmed cavalrymen. The physics were fundamentally problematic. A Colt Army revolver weighed over 2.5 pounds each. Releasing that spinning weight in midair meant catching it precisely at the grip within a fraction of a second. Any miscalculation sent the weapon flying away or landing awkwardly in your hand. During the chaos of mounted combat, with horses moving and men fighting at close quarters, the required precision was virtually impossible. Multiple cavalry reports from the Indian Wars describe troopers losing their revolvers after attempting this technique. The weapon simply spun away into the dust, leaving men defenseless. Even successful catches often resulted in fingers being broken by the rotating cylinder or trigger guard. The impact of catching a 2.5-pound spinning steel object frequently caused enough pain that troopers dropped the weapon immediately after catching it. The reverse cavalry spin embodied the worst aspects of military showmanship adapted for real combat. It looked impressive during training demonstrations with unloaded weapons, but proved disastrous when lives actually depended on weapon retention. Number 1. Twirling into the holster. The trick that never worked. The deadliest gun handling trick of the Wild West wasn't a combat technique at all. It was the seemingly simple act of spinning your revolver backward before returning it to the holster. Picture a shooter finishing his business, spinning his Colt around his finger in a celebratory flourish, then attempting to guide the rotating weapon back into the leather holster on his hip. Wild West show performers made this look effortless, spinning revolvers through complex patterns before dropping them perfectly into holsters. In real frontier situations, this trick killed more men than any actual gunfight technique on this list. The problem was simple geometry and probability. Holstering a stationary revolver required carefully guiding the barrel into a 4-inch opening without looking, using only muscle memory and spatial awareness. Adding rotation to that equation made success nearly impossible. The spinning revolver had to arrive at the holster at exactly the right angle, with exactly the right orientation, at exactly the right moment to slide cleanly into the leather. Any variation in spin speed, angle, or timing resulted in failure. The barrel could catch on the holster edge, the trigger guard could hook on the belt, or the entire weapon could miss completely. Dozens of documented cases from frontier towns describe men accidentally discharging their weapons while attempting to holster spinning revolvers. The trigger guard would catch on the holster or belt. The trigger itself would snag, and the weapon would fire. Multiple newspaper accounts from the 1870s and 80s describe self-inflicted gunshot wounds to the leg or groin area from holstering accidents. Even more men simply dropped their revolvers entirely, watching their expensive weapons clatter to the floor or fall into the dirt. The psychological damage was often worse than physical injury. Dropping or fumbling your weapon while showing off announced incompetence to everyone watching. In frontier towns, where reputation mattered enormously, being known as the man who shot himself showing off could destroy your credibility permanently. Professional gunfighters never spun their weapons after use. They methodically and carefully holstered their revolvers, using both hands if necessary, ensuring the weapon was secured properly. The showmanship culture of Wild West exhibitions and medicine shows created a dangerous mythology around gun spinning that killed or maimed numerous men who confused entertainment with practical weapon handling. The trick that looked most impressive in demonstrations proved most deadly in real application. From revolver twirls to reverse spins, these 15 techniques shared one fatal characteristic. They prioritized style over substance, over function, and entertainment over survival. Every trick on this list worked perfectly during controlled demonstrations with unloaded weapons. Every single one failed catastrophically when lives actually hung in the balance. The real gunfighters of the American frontier understood a simple truth that exhibition shooters never had to face. In genuine life-or-death situations, the man who survived wasn't the one with the fanciest tricks. He was the one who drew smoothly, aimed carefully, fired deliberately, and never stopped until the threat was completely neutralized. So, which of these deadly tricks shocked you the most? Did you realize that so many Wild West gun handling techniques were actually fatal liabilities rather than combat advantages?